Hey, I'm Allen Firstenberg,
I'm Lee Mallon,
and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
True Voice Devs.
Lee, it has been ages since you and I have been able to talk, and it is fantastic to have you on the show for the first time.
I know it's the classic, like long time listener, first time caller type situation.
So welcome to Two Voice Devs as your first time as a guest host. Why don't you kind of start by telling folks a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your development history, how you started, how you got to where you are now, and start out with and I guess finish up with what sort of stuff you're doing with these days.
Yeah, sure. So I started coding when I was like 12 years old, on what was a Toshiba MX 128K,
Ooh,
also known
okay.
as a poor kid's Commodore, and just continued to code all through my career. You know, did all the usual academic stuff, but then ended up running my own consultancy firm for 10 years in the UK. Then 5 years ago, went traveling around the world with my family, and now I'm based in the Middle East in the UAE and Abu Dhabi, where I've been kind of working with financial regulation, government agencies around artificial intelligence, and using that stuff to kind of change the world. And then more recently, I'm now a kind of CTO of a product company called Yalpop, which is like reinventing how we learn through personalization.
Very cool. Learn through personalization. So that's pretty interesting. Can you, and I feel like that's going to be what we're going to be talking the bulk about. So before I get into it, I have to say, when you first set out on your trip around the world, it was right at the tail end of COVID. And I remember you and I were talking a lot back then, and you were sharing with us your preparations for the adventure and kind of your we're planning on going here assuming the borders are open, so that was a fun time to watch what was going on. What was that like? What was the whole what motivated that? How did that trip around the world kind of turn out for you and your family?
Motivation wise, we always wanted to do it. It was just trying to find the right time. Were the kids going to be old enough? You know, were they going to kind of remember it? And then, like for many people, COVID happened. It kind of changed the dynamic of how we work and how we live. And we were fortunate enough not to have anyone really close to us kind of pass away from it, but we had some on the peripheries, and that was kind of like the catalyst to go like, what are we doing? Like, why are we not making this adventure? And we were very fortunate to see the world in a very unique way, because we would go to countries and there'd be no tourists, so we'd not see another tourist for like 10, 20 days. And also you got to see, you know, technology utilized in very interesting ways. You'd be in the middle of a hiking in a mountain in Sri Lanka, and there'd be some kid in basically like a mud hut with Skype open on a laptop doing remote work. So it was very eye opening.
Very interesting. I mean, I remember hearing some of your tales from the time, and it was fun to explore. And you've now settled down in UAE. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so now we live in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. We've been here for 2 years. I would say the best city in the world at the moment, especially for where they're trying to drive with artificial intelligence and just, um, for a great kind of family life. But obviously, I'm biased being here. So,
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and kind of how this fits in, how AI fits into it, and what you're doing. Because you and I go back to the early voice lunch days.
yeah,
So how
yeah,
is
it's I think you and I think always could kind of see where this stuff was going quite early on. And we just didn't know which level was going to be the thing that would drive forward, right? And voice was a big proponent of stuff I was doing with my company in the UK at the time, and also through the topics of obviously a voice lunch, but there was just this like barrier wall, right? When we just kind of intent matching and stuff just kind of hit a bit of a limit. And the kind of market kind of obviously died out before kind of LLMs kind of exploded and kind of reinvigorated it. But I think through all of that process, for me in particular, there was just this overarching thing outside of technology, which was why do I have to experience everything the same as everybody else? And
Mm.
personalization very much had a tainted word in the fact it was, Meta and Twitter and all these big companies who were just basically taking our data and, putting us into cohorts for advertising. And it wasn't something that we kind of got to benefit from. And then that kind of got exacerbated from the travel because, we traveled for like 500 and something days. We stayed in about 70 hotels in total and trying to find like you became quite efficient on trying to find hotels. But most, Booking.com we would use a lot, and but it was great for customer service. But just trying to find hotels that fit yours and your family's kind of needs, and it's quite a trivial thing. But like you spend hours upon hours trying to find it, even to the point that I ended up building like a script that would just go and scan all the images of a hotel because we figured out that if the hotel had a slide into the pool, the kids would have to queue for the slide, which means they were taught to other kids, which means they would then have kids to play with. So we just started finding hotels with slides, and that is a very unique thing, obviously for us. But then you don't get, I mean, you start to see the world in a way of like, a website is a website, and yes, they tweak prices or language based on IP address or some preferences, but I feel like we're about to, in the next kind of, it might still take a few years. I think in the next few years we're going to see the whole reinvention of how the web is rendered, which is going to be quite impactful for developers.
So it was really interesting to me that, when people think of personalization, I think that most people think of it, yes, in terms of, personalized ads. But even there, they kind of think of it in these big broad terms of, I'm looking for a hotel that identifies itself as family friendly. And it
Yeah,
sounds like what you were doing was saying anybody can talk a good game, but there's things that get exposed that really show what you want. You identified the fact that it wasn't just you were looking for a family friendly hotel, but you had figured out that for your family, the pool slide was a great indicator of a good hotel. And
yeah.
that's not just these big broad categories. These are little things that somehow you identified. And it seems like your vision is to say, I don't want to have to figure that out and specify it. I want to build tools that really figure out what those little things are for me. Maybe I even don't know exactly what that ends up being, and help me identify them. Help me find those matches on a very minute level. Does that sound right?
100%. But I think it's even, and I'm sure we can go into the weeds of it, but I think it's even more, which is, and I don't think this is how it'll play out because I think it's too kind of the perfect situation, which is you as a customer, as a user of a website, just to pick up website as an example, you should be able to control like your persona in when you're visiting that and the
Mm.
traits you want to share. I don't think
Mm,
that's how it'll
okay.
kind of play out. But if you're going to Amazon and you search for shoes, they're either for you or for someone, in an immediate family. But if they're for you, your foot size doesn't change once you hit an adult. So, why is that not kind of something that gets exposed and can be transferred like SSL can, so that preference can be shared with the website? But then you get into this issue. But then if they start storing all that data and it's really personalized, and where's the security? It opens up a lot of kind of questions, again, which we could dive into. But I think that concept of when I go to a site, why isn't the experience really tailored to me? If I only ever stay at these types of hotels, these brands, why don't even show me like even booking.com now, you search for like 4-star hotel in this city, you'll still get given apartments,
Mm.
because and also they're paying for ads as well. So
I was going to say
it's the
how much of
incentives
that is
there.
because they're pushing something that whether or
Sure.
not it's a great match for you, they're kind of hoping that you'll think, well, maybe that's a good enough match for me.
Exactly. And I think this is the hopeful change that I kind of I'm working on and also hope to see coming across all areas because it's just very inefficient. And a lot of this stuff may happen by proxy because And I don't know where your anger levels are around the concept of agents today nowadays.
Well,
Um,
that's kind of where I was about to go with this
yeah,
question.
and maybe all that stuff gets hidden away, and actually the thing that gets surfaced to you is that is that kind of filtration.
No, agents are going to be a big topic. We've actually got another guest host lined up that I'm hoping to talk about agents with. Um, but I think starting that off here might be a good idea, because it kind of sounds like what you're saying is, how do we build that personalized AI? How do we build that AI that represents our persona? Whether that's getting something for us, or that it has additional information on a one-off case to get something for somebody else, but still as us, representing our tastes, our whatever.
And I think also you kind of like I've been building some like POC stuff at the moment where the whole website renders in real time, like it generates the code on every page refresh for the whole site.
Is that efficient? I mean, that's my first reaction.
I think it comes down to like if you get to the end result 10 times quicker, then maybe it is, right? Like is
Mm.
it efficient from a compute point of view, from a model point of view? But we're seeing all this stuff, like the models released this week, like people are running them in the browser with GPU now. So you can start to see that code generation might actually be feasible in the browser off the back of like if we're just thinking in the LLM world, off the back of a prompt for rendering out the the interface that you want to use at that point in time to get or send the thing you want to do. It gets very kind of inception-y.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about what you're doing and where you're going with AI and AI personalization. Is that the right way to that you're expressing it?
Again, I think the AI bit is obviously it's the hype word, right? I think there's two. I think there's two bits to this, which is I always saw personalization from a technologist point of view, and was like, decision tree, clustering, and how do you, and then preferences. So, for example, my shoe size is this. I live in this place. If I'm saying I'm going on holiday, then just default the flight to my nearest airport,
Mm.
type of thing. And then I've got this learning company now called Yalpop. And my business partner, his background is ad tech and human behavior.
Uh huh.
So he kind of also called Lee. It's the one requirement of the company. Um, and he kind of unlocked or kind of showed me this world of human like behavior preferences and cognitive kind of how our brains kind of operate and how we do these things.
Uh huh.
The closest thing I guess people would relate to is like a Myers-Briggs type, kind of test would be the closest thing. And by using that coupled with the fact you can now generate things almost on demand, we have been able to build this platform now that means we can generate courses and lessons on any topic at all, and they can be rendered out in a suite of modalities tailored to how you will best learn in the
Hmm.
language and the modality for your preference, and also in the future in the context. So you could say, I've got 10 minutes, I'm walking the dog, my hands are full, or it will infer that by the walking of the dog. Um, I want the lesson on logical qubits, for example, and then it knows to turn it into audio, but you might be a visual person, so the language will be visual, but it's still delivering it to you through your podcast player.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, but that's the kind of direction I'm kind of seeing from a non-technology point of view. And then from a technology point of view is how can you make the experience of learning or just the experience of interacting with technology, if we think less Yelp and just more broadly, um, much more efficient and enjoyable.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by more efficient
So
and enjoyable?
Google released, or the Google obviously did their quantum computing announcement a few weeks back, and
Hmm.
the media went crazy with like they're gonna crack the world and all this type of stuff.
Yeah,
And
more logic than solve this
the
problem
atoms in the
faster than the
universe type of
whole
thing. Yeah.
lifetime of the universe. Yeah.
Yeah, and the great quote, which is if someone gives you a metric of how fast it is, they haven't solved the real problem yet, type of thing. Um, and so, but again, I've been to some talks here in Abu Dhabi around quantum computing, and I massively got a headache. So like I went onto Yalpop and I was like, right, explain quantum computing to me, and it knows my preferences, and I can just generate it out like a course and lessons. And then as I was walking, I just kind of got to listen to it and understand like some of the concepts and stuff, and in like 5 minute kind of bite-sized kind of topic. And it was an enjoyable thing because it understood I how I learn, but also, and we haven't got there quite yet. But again, like the things I'm interested in. So you can say you're interested in Pokemon and football,
Hmm.
and this is your favorite team, and the examples then frame around that concept.
Kind of what this reminds me of a little bit in a much more primitive way are uh, recommendation engines on
Yeah,
Netflix,
yeah,
for
yeah,
example. So
yeah,
that over time, it sees what movies you watch, it sees what movies you finish watching, and it has, this notion of genres on a very, very fine level of what you want. So, it's not just that you like 80s movies, it's that you like 80s movies that have a runtime of greater than 2 hours that feature this actor interacting with this actress. And
yeah,
from there, it knows that if you tend to like those, you will tend to like these others. But you may not tend to like 80s television shows of the
yeah,
same, so it's got these correlations on very, very minute levels. And
it
then
has. Yeah, I guess the one bit with that though is like they can't see who's watching it. They assume you're watching it.
that's true. And well, and that's where the profiles tend to, theoretically go in. And that's where they've
Yeah,
got, watch metrics and so forth. So yeah. So you're right.
yeah,
It's not perfect. And like I said, it's a more primitive
yeah.
uh thought, angle on this.
But actually, I don't think it's the primitive thing. I think it's that the technology, and not even I haven't really seen many other products doing this yet, and I hope it will come. Which is the current tech services, they treat users a bit kind of stupid, right? They kind of like, we know best, we know what
Mm.
you should watch, and they make these kind of cohort analysis of, like you said, like the recommendation engines, and sometimes it's great, but I live in the UAE. If I go into Netflix, statistically, the Indian, Hindu, um, Bollywood video audience outweighs the British audience dramatically. So the top 50 movies on my suggestions are, to be fair, they're pretty good. But they surface these things, and you're like, this is nothing like I would ever have watched before, which makes me kind of think these recommendation algorithms aren't as complicated or aren't as advanced as you kind of are led to believe they are.
Well, what I suspected it. I mean, similar when I go into some of the streaming services, and it's recommending to me this week's pro basketball or this week's college
Yeah,
basketball games, and I'm like, have I ever given an indication that I'm interested in this sport whatsoever or any sport whatsoever? So I feel like what's still happening is that we're slowly developing these recommendation engines, but at the same time we've got executives that are still saying, push this content. This content is
yeah,
important to
hundred
me.
percent.
So, override your recommendation algorithm and do what I want you to do instead.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, in the respect that there is no motivation or outcome to give the users back their control,
Mm.
without sounding too crazy. Because if Netflix came up and went like, you've just watched this, is it just you watching this, or is it you and your family? It would come across creepy,
Yes, no, that's an excellent point.
you know. But if a new service started up, which started off that way at the beginning and said, tells you your preferences, the types of movies you like, the types of actors, the types of things, then I think they would be able to reset the trust level to then present the stuff that you would be interested in, and then I think you would get a better kind of experience.
How much and from what the work you've done and from your interactions with the other Lee and so forth, how much do people actually reporting their preferences actually match with reality?
Probably more a question for other Lee, but but actually we've had this conversation before, which is you ask, you know, in Yalpop, the first thing you do is you do like a 20 question assessment, right, to try and
Right.
understand some of your things. And I said, he was like, yeah, but we can just have a question saying, which do you prefer? Like, because most people aren't stupid. You can be like, would you prefer to watch this, listen to it, or read it? There's going to be some things that people don't know about themselves. So that's kind of an obvious one. Like, do you enjoy watching something versus this? What you might not know is that in language, you're someone who says, how do I get to this objective rather than how do I get away from this problem? And they're the things that
Okay.
people don't massively know because it's just not in the in the kind of the zeitgeist of conversation. But most people would say, most people would say I'm a visual person, or I like listening to podcasts. From people who've done like our assessment stuff, we give them like a free report to say like this is some tips of how you could better learn, and everyone's really surprised by them outcomes. Like I
Hmm.
ran out my kids, and even they were like, "Oh right, okay," and it would typically mirror their behavior. So I think to the question, I think there's a lot of stuff that is subconscious that can come out through these types of things. But at the same time, if I support a football team, I support a football team.
Right. No, that's a
You
fair
know,
point. Yeah.
and I think that's a preference that's for you. I do think it all comes back to the trust aspect of that data and the companies and how they're using it and what they're using it for. I think unfortunately, I think new companies have to form for that. I don't think the existing companies are going to be able to do that because I
That
think
makes sense.
they've lost the trust.
Do you feel that it's a lack of trust or a lack of the company's vision of thinking that this is how, the companies have, the Disney will say this is what my content always looks like and people keep coming back for it. So I'm always going to
Yeah,
push it this way.
completely. And I would argue against it, but then who am I to say? I hope that by the end of this year, with Yalpop, we'll have data to prove otherwise.
Hmm.
We'll be like, these people did this compliance anti-money laundering course at work, and the traditional way they get a 60% pass rate, and they hate it, and it takes 2 hours of their time, or they get a 97% pass rate. We'll ignore the whole purpose of pass rates just because we don't want to go into that one. Um, and actually, people did it in 20 minutes, and they actually didn't hate doing it, and they wanted to do another CPD type thing because of that. So I think from that point of view, I think the data kind of will demonstrate it. And I think I just hope. I think I just hope that these things will change because like travel. I love travel, and you look at most of the sites out there, the Airbnbs, they're starting to think about these types of things. But you go to booking.com and they had these big announcements around AI and their kind of trip planning stuff. And it's all, a lot of it is kind of the hype cycle stuff. Um, and I just think it probably needs a bigger reinvention,
So
which may or may not work.
and I guess that really led into what I was about to ask you, which is where do you see AI and machine learning and large language models or other models, where do you see that fitting into the whole personalization aspect? For somebody who has the same vision that you do, what tools do they start looking at and playing with in the AI space or in other spaces that will help them do that? Where do they start building these things? What are the things that can help them?
Well, I think like, what does it look like? The travel one's an easy one to kind of jump on, and I don't want to go on too much about the learning thing because obviously that's kind of that's that thing. But the travel one's an easy one because if you there is an assumption that if you go to a website and you pick a hotel, it's going to give you a list of stuff. You'll either sort it by price or sort it by star reviews, whatever it may be. And you have no idea who that person is who leaves that review. You have no idea of the treats, how much they're willing to spend per hotel, what brands they like, if they were there for an anniversary, if they hated it, if they had a bad thing with the staff. You don't know any of this stuff. They rated it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 star, and then you get the aggregate. Um, the I think the ability that means I can ask an agent, some kind of assistant to me that goes, find me 10 hotels I can go to this weekend, in Dubai, for me and my family. That that means we can have like a resort experience, and that data is all very available. And then I think what will end up happening is other people's it will find people who've stayed at that hotel. So it'll find the 10 hotels. It'll look at all the company information. It'll probably check a few of the things that are obvious, like I only go to hotels that are 4 years old. I can afford this price point. We want twin beds. We want this, that. All the kind of obvious stuff. But when it then gets to like which ones, and then maybe it shortlists that to like 60 hotels. What I think the next bit then comes is then it goes and goes right. Alan stayed at that hotel
Hmm.
3 weeks ago. So did Jenny. So did Sally. So did Mark. Um, they all exhibit brands and spending power and family dynamics as you do. My agent's going to now go and talk to their agent, and they're all going to have a conversation to see what happened and like what type of thing they had. And by doing that, and then you'll get like a short list of like 3 to 5. The opportunity there is then when that purchase happens, that 20x% or whatever it may be doesn't go to booking.com anymore. It gets distributed to those agents of individuals that contributed towards that decision making that
Ah.
made you pick the hotel. So it opens up this kind of, because we would go to hotels, and especially during the pandemic when we were traveling, and there were no reviews because no one had been anywhere for 2 years. Or you go to Japan and the Western review sites aren't valid; they don't get used. So the ability for an agent to go off to a Japanese one, speak in Japanese, bring back the results, incentivize that person, or more pressingly would be someone's at the hotel now. Do you want to pay them $20 to have a live conversation with them to ask them some questions?
This is interesting and attractive. I guess part of the uncertainty that I've got in my head about this sounds really cool, but this only works if you've got tons and tons of data or tons and tons of people already that are involved in this. Because I, as a single business traveler, don't want to be connected up with somebody who is going to various hotels with their family. That's not a good match. But
So,
if there is no other, or might not be a good match,
yeah,
but if there's no other matches, it might end up being the closest match.
completely. Or it just doesn't. I think it comes down to there is a process because the alternative could be it rings the hotel,
Okay.
and just says, is the kids pool open? Because we've gone to many places, and especially in the Middle East in the summer, they do a lot of renovation because that's when people aren't there. So if you're then going to a staycation, stuff's closed, stuff's not open, or if it's Ramadan or it's some festive season, um, or like I would love to be able to have it automatically ring up to like a restaurant, be like, is it busy right now? Like and you
Mm.
can, and even just hearing the background noise, be like, okay, they can't even speak to me. Like I think these types of things, you're 100% right on the example of the traveler. But then it just wouldn't do that. It would be like, I can only get 3 people. Let's not even count that into. Let's go and look at Instagram and look at pictures that were posted within the vicinity of the hotel in the last 5 days and DM message the people on Instagram who I know have been there 3 days ago. And yes, they aren't then associated to you, but then you incentivize, right? You go, I know I've got someone who wants to stay at this hotel. They're trying to answer these questions. If you can just answer these multiple choice questions, I'll just give you like $5. And you ask that to 3 people, and then cross references. And again, I'm not saying, and I think it comes back to like you can't decision tree or recommendation engine this type of approach. This
Mm.
is where the agent kind of goal orientated structure has to come in.
I think your last point there of you can't decision tree that. I think that's the thing that a lot of people are having trouble getting past when it comes to agents. It's certainly one of the things that I
Yep,
have trouble getting past when it comes to agents. That we want to kind of give agents this pile of tools and let it let it loose to some extent. Is that
yeah, like you would a human.
well? But thinking about it, most travel agents, to use that analogy again, most travel agents have a very very limited set of tools they would go to. Most of them wouldn't, for example, look up Instagram and see what other people are saying. They're going by their experience or their connections, and that goes
Sure,
back to you know okay, so now we're going to have these agents that have been paid by a company to exist. They may not be a person there. There's just this bot that is representing the company that has gone and visited all of these hotels. What are the concerns you have about synthetic?
yeah, again, it comes back to trust, right? It opens up the
Yeah,
same problems. You basically just move the fake review problem to a fake agent problem.
yeah, basically,
Um, I think if you add, I think if you add monetization in, first of all, some kind of commerce element, that reduces a lot. You have to pay $1 to contribute, type of thing. That kind of helps. But again, I think it comes back to trust and the ability for the semantic web of interaction to mean that you are personalizing the stuff that comes in. We're not going to have a situation whereby I remember years and years ago, maybe even 20 years ago, I was working on a project and they were applying for some research money from in the UK from the government because I forget what they called it. It's like data banks or something. And what they wanted to do was loyalty cards for supermarkets was like the big thing, was all kind of kicking off. And their argument was we shouldn't be giving our payment information and our purchase history to these loyalty platforms. What should happen is the supermarket should basically expose all of their offers, all of their combinations of discounts, and then your kind of data bank should basically look at what you're interested in and filter out from the 10,000 potential combinations of offers what would be relevant to you, and that's where the data gets protected. Now, obviously, that doesn't work because why are they going to expose their 10,000 combination offers? Because that's how they have competitive advantage, etc. And I think that's the same problem, right? Um, I wonder if this just becomes resolved by the fact that agents have an accountability to the person they're intimidating or representing.
yes, okay.
So there's an element of a social score in the respect that, like, if you call me and say, Lee, I'm coming to the Middle East. I need a hotel to stay in with my family for 2 weeks. This is roughly what we want to spend. Where would you recommend? If I give you a rubbish recommendation, then we don't get to be friends anymore potentially, right? There's a social kind of impact from that conversation.
Oh, sure. So now you've got rating agents. So instead of rating hotels directly, so now Lee is going to have a 4.6 star rating, or Lee's agent is going to have a
But
4.6 star
on
rating.
that topic, right?
Yeah.
On that, for the thing that was needed at that point in time, I think it comes back to if we're applying Web 2 executed kind of web experiences to potentially a, let's just say, Web 4 experience. But actually, it's more like a pre-web because the inefficiencies that we had before, which was you would just ring up the hotel, you potentially go there if you were nearby to go and check it out, or you'd ask someone to if they lived in the area. You couldn't do that, and you couldn't do it at scale, and you couldn't do it at speed. But you kind of now can. And actually, agents are just, I think everyone's mistake of trying to make them more deterministic is they're trying to replicate the Web 2 way we did stuff.
Mm.
And actually, we're trying to replicate human behavior. Humans are completely sporadic to some degree, and therefore we should treat it more like the high street than a kind of globally predictable kind of outcome. And I think that's why, from a developer point of view, like rendering websites and rendering experiences, yes, like you said, using these tools where they don't quite do the right thing, or something's off, and we get annoyed by it because we want a deterministic output. But realistically, that's not what humans do. So I guess I wouldn't. I kind of think Web two, or the web experience from, let's just say, from the 90s to now, was kind of like the chrysalis into the butterfly type thing. And actually, we now know stuff, and we need to discount what we did and just take the knowledge to kind of go back to where we were and apply the technology from that point forward. And if that makes any sense to anyone, I congratulate you.
Well, okay. I was going to ask, where do you see people building that? But you said something though, that humans don't expect determinism, and I'm not sure that's true. Certainly, if I'm using your product,
Yep.
I want to know what to expect. Now, whether or not that is the same as what Mark is experiencing when using your product, that's not what I'm saying. But from time to time when I'm using you, I want to know what to expect. If I'm using a visual interface, I don't want my buttons moving around. I don't want menu items randomly changing. I at the very least want determinism for myself.
I would argue that you don't. You do
Really?
because you've been conditioned for 20 years to expect that. Again, I could be wrong, but the desire of buttons
Okay.
moving around, there shouldn't be, the buttons shouldn't be there.
I'm sorry, repeat that?
So if people, so this is a kind of a common kind of counter to when I say this, right? Is, but if I go into the website and it changes every time I view it, then I'm not going to know where the thing is. Then it's like, yes, but you're missing the point that it's not. You're not going to a website with 10,000 menu options. In theory, when you go to the website on a Monday at 9 a.m. for a purpose, it gives you four. When you go again on a Wednesday, you've already bought the trainers, you've already booked the hotel,
Okay.
so therefore it's giving you two options because you're either checking in because it's a day, or you're looking to change it, or it's. I think it's more the best analogy I like is that. Um, the rendering information becomes just in time.
Okay. No, I kind of get that. So again, to use your shopping analogy, when you are going to shop for something, you want controls that let you search for items and so forth. Once you've placed the order, though, you want front and center that button that says check the status of my order.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether and that button may not have been there before you placed an order, but at the very least, when you've returned to it, you want to be able to get back to that really quickly.
Yes. And
And
currently now you have to click 8 buttons to get to it,
right,
potentially.
right,
Yeah.
on a menu that is always there, so you will
Yeah.
at some point stumble across it when you haven't placed an order. So it doesn't make sense that it's there when you'll click on it and it says you don't have any orders with us.
100%.
Right. So you want that interface that is just in time. And I agree with that to some level. I think, and some of that means that if I'm designing an interaction with the person, I'll say I'm designing a website, even though I'm picturing a
Yeah.
futuristic website. Um, it needs to correctly anticipate everything that I need at that moment when I'm there, right? That's what you're
For the
talking about.
contact, for the contact, for the context at that point in time.
Right.
Yes. But
And
you can also tell it. It doesn't have to assume.
right.
You could just say, I'm not going to be in tomorrow. So therefore, the insinuation to that is, yeah, is this going to be delivered tomorrow? And
Okay.
therefore, I won't be here to. Do you know what I mean? Like it again. I think it comes back to, and this is not foolproof. It's not fully formed, right? This is like an evolution of things. But I think it's more the fact that we make the assumption because of how it's been is how it should be, and actually if you start to real if you take the actions of booking a hotel or doing something or learning a lesson or doing something, a course, um my view is that it's too many steps
I, going
because
back
the
though to the
decision tree.
right. No, going back to the shopping example though. So a site, and I'm using a site only because it's visual and it's easy
Yeah,
to
yeah.
explain. Um, a site when
and
I'm
and shows
returning
that
to,
you are a visual person.
I'm not a. I don't know what. Okay, fine. Um, I mean, if you want, I could talk about it conversationally, but that's another story altogether.
Yeah.
Um, but if I'm returning to it, I wanted to know, to have that context and to at least let me be able to go outside it. But I would say that the expectation that I now have, and maybe this is the expectation we want to, you're building to, is that when I show up, there is a button that I can find that says track my order, that I can easily find, that's visible and clear, that is track my order. That's what I mean about consistency. That the right thing is in the right place and that
Sure.
I don't have to always be hunting around for it.
Completely. But I think the perception of hunting around is because when people have done it before, they're either trying to evade customer support, right? We want to
Right.
hide that because it's cost, right? We want to push the adverts because that's the thing that people are, that's how we make money. Again, I think it comes back to the incentives and potentially misaligned. The
I
most easiest experience is to buy stuff. Apple makes money on hardware. You can literally go into the store on the app, press pay, to not even press a button, literally use your face and walk out with the product. It's Apple, so it's an edge case of an example, but it works, right? So it's just how do you now can with technology that kind of flow to other areas.
I guess what kind of worries me about dynamic interfaces is that I want to be able to do things in the way that I want, in the way that I'm doing them. But I don't want to keep that to keep moving around from time to time. So, if I go today and I've done a purchase, and the next time I'm there, it'll, give me the button that says track me the status of the order.
Yeah,
If I then make another purchase, is it going to say, oh, this person just likes making purchases? Does the status of the order now less important? So we're going to move that button over this way a little bit more and make this field more prominent, you know, or whatever. I want to be able to say, okay, it's not just, I want to be able, that button track my order should be prominent, but it shouldn't keep jumping around so that I have trouble finding it.
100%. But I think I think you've answered the question yourself without realizing, which is currently when you go back or when you do this action, going to a website is going to Google or going to the address bar and typing in the Shopify.com or whatever Amazon.com, and that intent if you typed in Amazon.com/clothing/shorts / da 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 da, you would get to the product, right? But we don't. We go to Amazon.com because the user experience of Amazon.com to then enter in the search bar is the more convenient factor. If you didn't have to type Amazon.com and actually what you typed was, I need some shoes, the
Okay.
experience for that becomes a different thing, right? And then the rendering of that is, okay,
Well,
here is
and
8 different shoes, of which some are from Amazon, some are from
so
somewhere else. And
so this was the debate that we've been having for like 5 years, 5, 6 years now in the voice community. And we're now seeing the same kind of issues with AI in a conversational interface. And that's of discovery. How do I know that I can do something without something telling me that I can do it?
sure.
Because you say, I just want to go in and type in or just say out loud, I want to look for some shoes. And conversationally, that kind of makes sense. But how do I know to do that without knowing that I can do that? What's the, what is the, at what level are we expecting people to know how to do this? And at what level do we need to help them along and learn that? And that's both in the short term and also this long term visionary interface.
I guess if you need shoes, you need shoes, right?
Well, I mean, to use another example though, when Uber and Lyft first launched,
Yeah,
they were entirely foreign concepts. Somehow we had to explain to people, yeah, it's like a taxi, but you're not waving your arm or
yeah,
standing in
sure.
a taxi queue. You're punching in your phone and you're saying where you're going from and to, and it gives you all this. Somehow we needed to explain to them this new concept. How do you explain to people a new concept when it's a new concept? How do you bootstrap it?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I can kind of answer this from the learning point of view. So with Yalpop, we when we started it off, we were like, right, there are just on the kind of human behavior side of things, 141 million combinations, right? So, and that's without you adding in the fact that you like Pokemon and you like this and et cetera, et cetera. And the fact you're walking the dog. So the idea would be to make it like a conversational experience, right? Like
Hmm.
what you want to learn today, that type of thing. But again, it comes back to you can go into ChatGPT today and you can say, give me a lesson plan and a structure for learning something. The thing is, you don't know what questions to ask,
Right.
right? So actually, what you have to do, as you do currently with Yalpop, is you go and you see someone creates a course on quantum entanglement or introduction to quantum computing, and you go, oh, that looks interesting. And and a lot of that experience is still quite Web 2y in the view of like learning a course. And we slowly go as we've demonstrated to people, they go into the course and it will like default to the audio player. And they'll be like, oh, I was going to read this. And we're like, well, yeah, but your preference is that you want to listen to it, and then they listen to it, or they just listen to it and they don't even realize that there was text version or a video version. And I think it's this incremental thing. Like we're currently
Okay.
operating our like level 4 on our personalization thing, and we have 26 levels. And if we jump straight to 26, it will, it's some crazy kind of weird experience. And also, it's not cost effective to run it at that level of personalization yet. So I think there's a, like you said, it's the existing companies that are there now should be evolving these things in these stages. I just don't think they are, and I just don't think the incentives are there because it's all hold the data. I want the data. I want like the control, rather than go, you want to learn something, or you want to buy something, or you want to experience something. You have all this personalization about you that's yours. I want to sell you something, I want to deliver something, I want to teach you something. Um,
So
that's the thing. But then you have to pay for it,
I was going
you
to say,
know.
so what's the incentive here for a company to be adopting these techniques more?
I think because they're going to lose if they don't,
So you're
you
saying
know,
somebody else is going to come along and, but then what's the
100%.
incentive for that company?
So let's just pick with Yalpop with learning. If we are able to make it so that you can either learn faster, more enjoyably, and is more cost effective, let's just say that, surely you will pick that over the established thing, which is just, three PDFs, maybe a video with a person that's talking to camera that is an accent that you don't, you might just not like a certain accent. Whereas this thing is like, if this thing is generated a 5-minute course whilst you're walking the dog, you've said that you want to hear it in Morgan Freeman style voice, and it becomes entertainment,
Hmm.
rather than learning, and
So you're saying essentially that right now it starts out as a competitive advantage and it becomes you need to do this in order to compete.
I believe so, because I think you apply the same to products, right? And then from a product point of view, if I go to booking.com as I've done today, and I'm trying to find a hotel for next weekend, and I hate it. It's the worst experience ever. But if there was another site that I saw and it was like, just tell us 10 things about you for this weekend, and it was good. It has to work, right? It has to be a good
Hmm.
experience. And it surfaces the hotels. I'm just going to buy it because I was going to buy it from booking.com. So the affiliate fee is still available um, to these things. Then I think they win.
So again, I guess it goes down to if I'm a developer and I've listened to us for the past bunch of minutes and I'm saying, you know what, these ideas are spot on. Where do you encourage people to start looking on working to build this sort of thing themselves? What do they need to learn? What are the tools they need to start experimenting with today?
Like how you were pushing just then on like developers and like what tools they can use and how they can go about kind of driving this. I think that, you know, of course that's the case, but actually the tools are just there. Like there's nothing, using if you're using ChatGPT, you can use these models to write code to generate stuff. The biggest problem with it is it's a mindset shift. The idea of how can you know, make something that's more user centric? How can you make something that is non-deterministic but still provides a good
Mm.
experience? these are the actual problems, and I think for developers, it's not a case of like the AI is going to come and take your code job. It's that actually you're probably not going to want to do the code job because the AI code's actually going to like I've done stuff where I've wrote and I've gone like write this, and I'm like holy, like that's a really like I couldn't have done better, you know. But actually, it then enables me to then go, okay, let's now focus more on the product. Let's start focusing on this, and start thinking like, okay, if oh, can you write code that does this? And which makes it more of a user thing rather than that. So I think developers don't need to worry too much about, should I use LangChain? Should I use Gemini? Should I use OpenAI? Should I use Azure, et cetera, et cetera? I do think it's more like what really thinking about what's the problem you want to solve and can you reinvent the solving of that problem because everything's open.
I would say it's thinking about the problem you would solve and being able to describe the problem and how to solve it.
100%.
Not this is the line of code. It's more of the being able to describe in general terms where you're trying to go. Because
Yeah.
it's amazing to me that how many people have trouble doing just that. Even
Yeah.
before AI, people couldn't do that.
Complete. There's a guy I saw a post. I can't remember the name. I'll try and grab the link out so you can reference it. But this guy posted on LinkedIn, and basically he has a team of software developers, and they now have a zero code writing rule. Everything has to come from a prompt,
Wow.
and their efficiency. I can't remember the stats, but he was like the efficiency's gone up, the code quality's gone up, but basically the developers are not allowed to write code now. They have to write it in English, which means, and this is what he was saying was they have to get better at explaining the problem, understanding what the purpose is, and then they basically take the code that's generated and put it in. So I think from a developer point of view, there's two things. There's the first one, which is you need to be using these tools to develop in general, right? Because if you're not, then the tools are really good if you can use them. If you're stuck, like for me, from like 1:30 p.m. till 3:30 p.m. when I'm just like I've had some lunch, I'm just not quite there. I'm still operating now at like 90% because I'm just like write me a JavaScript function that does this, you know. And so from that point of view, I think that's how developers started it. Because what
Well,
will happen is
that was last week's episode. So, um,
But but I think
okay,
that's the starting point, right? I think that is the bit where it's kind of like you use them tools because then you start to see what's possible. Because I think, in the last year, I've trained, I don't know, 400 people in introductions to like AI, right? Across the board, developers, executives, um, and a lot of it is there is this expectation and hype around what it is, and then there's the reality. But then there's a missing piece, which is the power user. So if you're a developer and you have the ability to use the tools, you get to see the reality of what they are. And yes, there's no model or agent or something's going to start taking your job tomorrow because like you won't be able to like set up OAuth properly or something, or it won't get some permission thing. But I guarantee you, it'll write the boilerplate code for your project, within like 2 minutes, for you to then accelerate what you're doing. It's
okay.
it's it's I think that, but I think from a developer's side from it, I think that from a technical point of view, I just use the tools and bring it into my current way of working, and then maybe the existing kind of companies will start to see this stuff, because the developers will be like, oh, you've managed to do this thing a lot faster. Well, I'm using this AI tool that does this and this, and it'll start to make the non-developers understand more about what this stuff can do. Um, but on the whole of it, I think developers should basically find stuff that they love doing, either as a passion project or a new business, and they should just basically see how they could build that with a much more human-centric delivery
Mm.
system, which we can just call personalization, but let's just say it favors the human, um, and start building it because as well as the fact that the technology has increased dramatically and the tooling has got better, you equally don't have to hire 100 people to build a business now with this stuff. You know, my business partner with Yalpop, like our plan is not to hire another employee. We're currently training. Every time we speak, every time we do, we document and we record all of our meetings, and it all feeds into a marketing model, into a finance model, into a strategy model, into a content model.
Hmm.
And these are all basically to eventually become agent-based roles. So, I think there is um, from a developer side, I'd be utilizing the next kind of 2 years to build your own solo kind of product or business and think about it from a end user point of, like, how can you delight the user,
Okay.
and then just kind of work backwards, because the data's out there, and I just think the product landscape is quite lacking on it. You try and get customer support or help, it's painful.
And I think that's kind of like the best note to end things on. Have this user focus is really just the way forward on this. So I you and I could talk about this for another hour at least. I am quite sure. And I'm sure we will talk about this another time. So where can people find you in the meantime?
If you type in my name, I'm the only person with my name, Lee Mallon. So I'm easy to find, mostly on LinkedIn, and also Yalpop is yalpop.com if you want to give it a try.
So thanks very much for coming on, Lee. And I'm sure we will be discussing these topics and have you on another time on Two Voice Devs.
That'd be amazing. Thank you to Voice Steps.